Hey, hello everyone, welcome. Oof, my internet is bad today. I apologize for the quality. I'm getting some dropped frames here, so hopefully that will improve itself as our stream goes on. Thank you so much for joining me. We've got a big topic today. Stirred the pot a little bit on the internet last week by saying that random encounters sucked. And here's why. And I talked a little bit about it last week. A little distracted here by watching the stream go in and out. So, I wanted to give a full disorganized play session to talking about how I think random encounters could be improved, because a lot of people, I don't know about a lot of people. There is a mixed reaction on Twitter about this very controversial statement, apparently, that is threatening to ruin gaming everywhere, that random encounters are not a great play experience. That's my basic premise. We're going to talk about why, and we're going to talk about how to fix that. So that is our agenda for today. We're going to talk about some of the elements that you need to consider to improve the experience of random encounters. And conversely, we're going to talk about what the elements are that, I talked about it a little bit last Thursday, but I want to talk in more depth about some of the aspects of random encounters that I don't think provide for a good play experience. So, just to roll down the list of topics today, the bulk of our conversation is about random encounters that don't suck. So we're going to talk about facing, player facing versus GM facing, the purpose for the GM, purpose for play, creating specifics. I can't point down. Here, I'm actually pointing at this stuff. And then if we have time, we may do a recap of session 10. There were some interesting things that happened last night in our finale, really sort of our denouement session of Sunless Citadel. That was last night. It was a great session. I hope you tuned in. If you didn't, you can catch it on the VOD. It'll be up on YouTube at some point. But mostly, if you couldn't watch last night, you should be able to catch it on our Twitch channel. That's where we like to see people chime in, tune in, check in. All right, so let's get down to the brass tacks, as it were, right? Okay, so I think one of the biggest issues that random encounters have in terms of the play experience, we'll start there, is that they are completely opaque to the players. The players, if a random encounter is run really well, the players have no idea that it's a random encounter. Okay, so essentially it's this weird mini game that the DM plays with themselves behind the screen, and 17 times out of 20, nothing happens, and there's no result, and the players, there's just this weird pause in play where the DM kind of like is doing something. Nobody knows what. There's no red flag that we wave over. Hang on, guys, I'm checking for random encounters. There's just fidgeting that happens behind the screen. The DM looks confused, perhaps, for a moment, consults some text or charts, and then goes, okay, nothing happens. Completely underwhelming experience. Now, if something does come up on the chart and there's a random encounter, the DM does not really want to tip their hand that that's going on, right? That it's just a random encounter. So for me, it's a very problematic mechanic, or it's a very problematic play experience, because ostensibly, one of the ideas here is that the world is a dynamic and alive and potentially hostile or whatever, and that the hand of fate, the roll of the die, can change the party's course of action or plans for the evening or whatever, right? But the party has no idea what the possible outcomes of that roll are. They don't even probably know that that roll is happening, unless, in a metagame sense, the DM goes, okay, well, you camp for the night, let's see what happens. Boom, 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 right? Even then, let's camp for the night, let's see what happens. Rolling dice, nobody cares. I mean, theoretically they care, right? But they can't see the roll. They don't know what the odds are. None of that stuff matters, right? It's hard for the players to get buy-in in something that they really can't influence much, and that they don't know what the potential costs or consequences are to setting a really diligent watch versus you know what, the elf only needs to meditate for 4 hours. Let him take the next 8 or whatever it is, right? So one of the big issues that I have with random encounters is that it's supposed to be this experience that the players are going to feel threatened by or feel pressure by or have some sort of stake in the outcome. And yet all of the mechanics involved in determining that stake sit on the DM side of the screen, and they really can't influence them other than like, oh, where do you decide to make camp? Do you press on? Like some very rudimentary adventuring decisions, right? Like, okay, maybe that was an exciting cliffhanger decision when the first 10 times you played D&D, but by the time you've played 3 years or more, it's like making camp is just sort of like, okay, well, we'll do that so the DM doesn't be a dick to us. Like that's it, right? All right. So EFA, I'm not sure how to pronounce that handle, but brings up exactly my point or my solution to this particular piece of the problem, which is make random encounters player facing. Make the players roll for random encounters. Even if you don't tell them what's necessarily on the chart, if you tell them, okay, you have, if you roll an 18 or 18, 19 or 20, you're going, something's going to happen. Well, now at least they know, like, oh, I can't influence this roll, but at least I'm making it. And it helps kind of alleviate that sort of DM mistrust thing of like, was that supposed to happen? Did that really happen? Is he just rolling? It alleviates on the one hand, like, oh, he's just glad handing us. He's giving us a free pass here, and the night passes uneventfully. I bet he didn't even look at what those dice said. Or what was that all about? Are you just punishing us because we pantsed your last encounter? If you make the players roll and you tell them, okay, well, if you get a 19 or 20, then something's going to happen. Oh, okay. All right. So make them roll like, maybe for each player who's having a watch, make them roll, etc. Right? Also, you can scale this if you so choose, right? Okay, well, you can press on and make camp by the light of day, and you'll only have a random encounter on a roll of 20. You can settle down here during the light of day and make a good, safe, secure camp and only have a random encounter on a roll of 1 and 20. Or you can really push hard and get further along down the road, make better progress, but now you increase to a 17 out of 20 or whatever, right? So you can allow them, if you put the roll in the player's hands, you can also give them options that they can choose to increase or decrease their chance of something happening with that roll. So you give them some agency over whether they want to risk a random encounter or not. Rather than like, okay, well, you could rather than the vague kind of, well, you could push on, but it's going to be dark in the swamp. I mean, there's better ways to finesse that. Obviously, you can handle it in a better way if that's the way you choose to handle it. I'm just saying, if you give them the opportunity to roll, that also gives you the opportunity to put modifiers on it depending upon how they act. And if you inform them of what those modifiers are, or at least give them some actions that they can take to increase the odds of an encounter but gain something, or decrease the odds of an encounter and have relative safety, or whatever it is, then you have, not only is there meaning attached to the role, but they have influence over the role. They have a buy-in on whether this thing matters. Because Ultimately, the biggest problem with random encounters is they can be pointless, and you do not want them to be pointless. 1-7 Design, is that you, Mr. John Harper? Is that you out there? 1-7 Design says, traditionally the random encounter roll was known by the PCs, and the stakes are known, so searching or listening at doors, etc. triggered it, and it's caused by PC actions. Maybe that tradition has been lost, or maybe non-Dungeon-y D&D killed it. Yes, very good. John, welcome aboard. I'm so glad to see you here today. I'm a big fan, as you, I believe, are well aware. Yes, so I think that is a tremendous point, right? Is that having the players know what the role means gives them an investment in it. So make it player facing rather than a DM only kind of mini game. That's one piece of advice that I would give you. The other, so let me just move on to the next topic here, which is the purpose for the GM. So I made this provocative blanket statement that random encounters are dumb, and I got a ton of different pushback on it, which is all legitimate and fine, right? Like, the nature of Twitter is that people only read one tweet, even though it says one of whatever, so I wish people had read the whole thing, but some of it's on me. Here's the reason, though, that the feedback was all over the place, which is it's a very clunky and amorphous mechanic. Now, it being an amorphous mechanic could be okay. It being clunky is not, right? So as they were traditionally presented, and where I have one here, right? So as they're traditionally presented, it's you roll a die, and then you are given a menu of monsters that will then be randomly determined, right? And there's just not a lot of meat here. Okay. The purpose of random encounters, because this thing is so amorphous, is really unclear. And every DM uses them in a different fashion. And that's why, and because it's so clunky, they have improvised around this mechanic to make it work for them. But they're all using it, making it work to a different purpose. Or maybe to multiple different purposes. But it's important to realize, why am I doing this thing with my players? Specifically, why am I doing this thing without my players is really, as it's traditionally presented, right? So there's a variety of reasons that DMs, I believe, in my opinion, there's a variety of reasons DMs employ random encounters, and they're so invested in it because they've had to kludge together a solution that works for them around the purpose that they choose, right? So the number one most obvious purpose is to reinforce the idea that the world is a hostile and dangerous place. You shouldn't rest in the dungeon. You should not camp outside of that cave. You should journey all the way through the dark woods. You should, you are unsafe until you have re-entered the realm of civilization, right? And that is absolutely the most commonly stated purpose of random encounters. However, this is not great. I don't know. If a skeleton shows up, it can ruin your dungeoneering night, I guess. It tends to be more of an inconvenience. It's not very compelling, just the way that this is stated, right? So let me just run down the purposes, and we'll talk more in how to fix this. But one of the reasons everybody had such a personal reaction to this is they all have their own personal take, and there's really no common agreed upon purpose for a random encounter. The most common, of course, is reinforce the world as someplace that's hostile and dangerous. Okay? Probably, I would say the number two thing is that it's an opportunity for the DM to improvise, right? Oh, okay, I get to be surprised about what's going to happen next. I have this book. that tells me where all the, what's in what room, and I could maybe improvise that this guy's going to move over here or whatever. But if a random encounter happens, oh, now something that goes off the plot, goes off the script, is allowed to come into play, right? So that's fine. I'm certainly a fan of improv. Um, Again, let's go back and take a look. This is not a great tool for improvising. Let's put it this way. I can do much better improv. I can give a much better suggestion for improvisation than, say, a kobold. Or 3 kobolds. It doesn't mean a lot. Okay, great. A couple other things. As Mirakel76 points out, you can apply pressure to the party during rest or travel. Okay, that's sort of along the lines of painting the world as a dangerous place, but it's also, I consider that part of resource draining, right? So it's not so much necessarily like you're going to have a hostile encounter as something might happen. Keep moving, keep going. Use resources to keep yourself ahead of the spread, right? James V points out it might have basically originally been implemented as an XP engine, to grind XP. Some DMs used random encounters to paint the world as a larger and more dynamic place beyond what the core storyline is, okay? Yes, you guys are on your quest to find Black Razor and bring it to the King's armorer so that he may study it and hopefully unlock its secrets. But in the meantime, there's this war going on over here, and a dragon is ravaging the countryside, and you are not the only focus of action in the world. All right, that's fine. Replayability has been suggested. So, for instance, if you were to play Storm King's Thunder, it may be a totally different experience depending upon what random encounters occurred to you while you're traveling between Tribawar and Silvery Moon, etc. It's a way to use the same sort of loose structure, but have a dynamic element, or have the opposition or the elements within it be dynamic and interesting, right? I don't know how many people actually replay adventures enough that that's a significant feature of random encounters. That's a question on my mind. A couple other purposes that I think might apply to random encounters. Sandbox style play is definitely something where you don't know, you just lay this tableau out on the table, and where they go and visit and what kind of things are happening there is not directed by the GM, it's directed by the party, and it helps to have a full plate of random encounters that help fill in and connect the dots maybe between those things without having to script everything in hand. You just have a set of random encounters that will help lead you to, okay, well, when they get to the Great Pyramid of, the Oozing Eye, we know that, okay, well, here's what's going on, etc., 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 right? So sandbox style play, and that's something in my original Twitter thread that I called out. This may work great for you for sandbox style play. There's another version of play that somebody brought up, which is like, well, you don't know what the plot is, so random encounters help you determine what the plot actually is. So that's a very improv-heavy approach to DMing. Again, I have no qualms about that. If you can pursue that and you can successfully execute that, and I like to think that it's a technique that you can master. It's certainly a skill that I've developed by playing more open-ended games. I will say, since John is here, I'm a big fan. I'm a big fan of Danger Patrol, and there's no predetermined plot to Danger Patrol. You start with the players describing the cliffhanger from last time, and then you build the story from there. So I'm certainly a fan of that style of play. It is not traditionally deployed in a D&D type of setting. But I call that, I've come up with this name for it. I call that bark in the dark. Okay, which is basically sort of you bark, and then where the echo is, you chase that noise. Okay, and that's also the key to successful improvising at the table, is you put details out there, and when the players respond to them, you keep pursuing them. And the stuff that they don't respond to, you kind of set that aside. I'm not saying dispose of it, but you can set that aside and then either bring it back and see if it seems compelling, or just let it go and follow the train of things that they're interesting and help develop the story that they want to chase. So that's what I call bark in the dark. You start by making a noise, and then you see where the echo is, and you kind of like figure out the dimensions of the room from that. Another potential purpose that I don't think is commonly deployed, but I had to write it down, is redirecting or refocusing the player's attention. Now that can mean a couple different things. That can mean zeroing in on the plot, or it can also mean like, oh, you guys are at a dead end, let me give you a new avenue to pursue, right? Or how about a little sidetrack? Here's a change of pace. We've been doing this heavy murder mystery type of thing. How about a wild and woolly role-playing encounter that's very frivolous and just fun and lets you kind of throw some dice around and do goofy stuff in the weird, monkey mage's laboratory or whatever it may be, right? So redirect, refocus the player's attention. And then the final thing that I have written down here is to demonstrate the scope of the plot as it ripples out into the world. So you might think to yourself, oh, well, this is just a different variation of showing that the world is bigger than the core storyline that the players are involved in. Actually, this is the opposite of that, in that this is showing that what the players are involved in has repercussions or influences outside of their immediate area. So, yeah, you're searching for Black Razor, and meanwhile the King's armies are slowly being defeated by the Dark Lich's forces, or whatever it is, and now you're encountering refugees, wounded soldiers. You're reinforcing for the players why their mission is important. The thing that you're doing does exist in faint, it has faint echoes outside of what you're working on. So those are those are different purposes why you might deploy random encounters. And just to circle back around on my point is that when I said I think random encounters are dumb, everybody has this like guttural reaction because like, oh no, I've used them to great effect. Okay, well, number one, that's confirmation bias, right? Like, yeah, you've used them to great effect. You've also ignored so many different roles for random encounters. Like, the amount of time that you remember those 3 memorable random encounters that really changed a session, but you've discarded literally hundreds of other random encounter roles that didn't mean anything. So I would question why you think you're getting a lot of bang for your buck out of the random encounter mechanic. But then secondly, you've made this thing work for you for your purpose because it serves so many different masters. It can be a way to drain resources or to give them XP. It can be just a nice frivolous side encounter that changes changes the tone, changes the pace of what's happening in the adventure or the campaign at that time. It can be just an opportunity for you as the DM to like goof off and challenge this different part of your brain that's like, oh wait, well, how am I gonna make these skeletons actually interesting, right? So I'm not saying that any one of these is the best purpose for a random encounter. What I'm saying is, when you think about random encounters, think about why you like them. What is it? What is the function within the game that they fulfill for you? And could it be doing a better job of fulfilling that function? Because I would argue that unless you are strictly trying to drain XP from, or drain hit points and build XP, this particular table does not serve any of those other purposes on its face. Now, you, I am sure, through your years of GMing experience, if you're like me, you've taken this thing and you've figured out a way to make it work. But not by using what's on the page. What's on the page is the most boring, bland suggestion that there is. You figured out a way to improvise to make this an engaging experience with this kind of flat, uninspired turd of a suggestion. A kobold shows up. You've developed skills beyond what the mechanic offers. My argument to you, oh, here comes the landscapers. My argument to you is, why not build yourself a better tool? Let's hope it's not too loud downstairs. I apologize. Every once in a while, especially when I start the stream late, the landscapers come and have to overtake the stream a little bit. Now, one thing that you can do that is a completely valid option is you can build Storm King's Thunder. Whoa, let's not do that. Hello. Hi. You can build more specific encounters, right? Applying specifics is one way to give yourself a leg up whenever you're DMing. As long as you don't get too many specifics that you get overwhelmed by them or you overwhelm your players with too much detail, giving yourself just a dose of specifics helps you develop an encounter that's engaging, right? I have had a random encounter with my landscapers. So, let's look at, as we did last week, the Storm King's Thunder, an example from Storm King's Thunder. The characters come across 3d6 plus 2 orcs. There's a 25% chance that they have prisoners. Here's a description of the leader of the prisoners, what happened to them, where they want to go, what they can offer the party if they help them. This is terrific. There's a great set of specifics built into this random encounter. Now, as I argued last week, one pitfall I would warn you about is you start to write these things and they become so interesting that they just become full-blown encounters in and of themselves. And then rolling dice to see whether they happen or not is really a fairly arbitrary matter, and in more cases than not, you're gonna be like, oh man, I put so much time into this. This is such a great encounter. I don't care what the dice say. I'm gonna drop it in here on them, which is fine. But then why are you rolling for random encounters, right? As I said earlier, but it bears repeating, a great random encounter is indistinguishable from a great encounter that is scripted. If the players know you're improvising, you're usually in trouble. That you start to break down the player DM trust of like, oh, he's just making this up. Is he making this up and he's going to screw us, or what's going to happen here? That brings up a whole larger issue that we're not going to get into, but it is one of the dangers, right? Is if your players see you juggling the plates, they're no longer lost in the magic of the plates flying through the air. They're worried about you and whether you're going to drop and what's actually going on. So that's it is a perfectly valid strategy if it works for you, and you can avoid the temptation of, oh, I'm getting sucked into, oh, I really love, why can't this be a showcase thing, or when is it, or oh, it would have been great if that had showed up, you know. If you can avoid the temptation to fudge shoehorning in your random encounters, then maybe writing, you know, plot specific, story specific, world specific details really helps you out. You know, this whole talk, just to be clear, is your mileage may vary. All I want you to do is have a great game. If you're having a great time and your players are having a great time, and you do that by rolling a d6 and a 1 means a random encounter and a 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6 doesn't mean anything, great. Like, it's your game. Have the best game that you can be. I'm giving you my insight and experience as a long-term DM on how I think you can... Some things you want to think about in terms of, are you running your game? Are there different ways to run your game better, more fun, more interesting? Provide a new challenge, provide a new avenue for you to try out in your DMing style, in your play style. I am not the fun police. All right, so we've talked about the purposes for the GM. It could be as simple as draining resources, showing that the world is a hostile place. It could be as simple as, I love improv. There's some things that I want to be surprised about during the session. Random encounters provide the opportunity for that to get injected into my game. I would also argue just throwing random details out there and seeing what your players hook on can help you out, but that's a different topic. I would argue there's better ways to improvise in your game. But those are sort of like the big ones, right? And then secondarily, like, paint that the world is larger than just what is scripted on the page or just what the players are immediately dealing with. That there are outside influences who can either aid them, reflect on their experience, hinder them, etc. Or there's just completely different plot threads going on out there. Hey, you know what? You want to chase this one? Great. All right. So let's tackle the next piece of the puzzle here. Those are the purposes for the GM. But we also have to look at the purposes within play. Okay? So not just like, oh, I like to improvise, I like to have a surprise encounter for myself as the GM during the middle of the game, or I like to make sure that the players feel threatened, so I'm going to use random encounters, etc., 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 right? You also have to stop and ask yourself, why is this thing happening within the context of the play experience, right? What function does this serve within the arc of the play experience? So, what do I mean by that? We really need to look at this on a meta level, and I don't mean a meta level in terms of game mechanics. I mean a meta level in terms of the story arc or the play experience that is happening at the table with everyone else, right? Let me give you some specifics, and hopefully that will kind of click into place. You can use random encounters to change the pace or the tone of what's happening. Oh, they've been through this series of grueling fights. Let's have something frivolous. Let's have something fun happen to the players, because this is getting monotonous. Okay? You can use it again to drain resources, and by that I mean raise the stakes on what's happening. Now, I don't like to use just like generic raise the stakes, because that's kind of meaningless. That's really the net effect. But if you drain resources or you heighten the tension, you heighten the tension, you raise the stakes on what's happening. Oh, guys, I'm running out of spells points or whatever it is. I don't have any third level slots left. I don't have any healing potions left. Okay, well, it ratchets up tension. That changes the mood. You can use it to. I'm trying to think of how I want to fit this in here. All right, let me throw a few more of these things out, and then we'll get to the meat of kind of where I want to go with this. Right, the actual demonstrable product of this philosophy. Right. So you can use random encounters to address things in the game, to resolve a mystery, right? Or to introduce a new mystery, or to evoke wonder with the players. Again, that's one of those, like, let's change the tone, let's change the pace. You can use a random encounter to reveal a weakness, foreshadow something that's happening, condense or streamline the plot, or bust open the plot. As we talked about, oh, you guys are headed towards this great pyramid, but along the way, you find this fortune teller's hut out in the middle of nowhere. He offers to read your fortune in exchange for a few locks of your hair. So you have to look at, at what the play function of the encounter is. What's the encounter goal? Or yeah, I guess the encounter goal is, I've got it really more as the play function, but what is the purpose of this encounter? And I would also refer to that as, what is the purpose of this within the plot, right? But some people get really, really like, oh, I don't have a preordained plot, or why does everything have to be nailed to the plot, or whatever. Okay, that's fine. But in terms of everybody's trying to create a story arc of some sort, at least I believe, my philosophy is you should be. I'm not saying it has to be resolved that session. In fact, I encourage you to not resolve your story arcs into neat lumps every session. I really believe that we can take a lot of lessons from serialized television, where maybe there's a somewhat satisfying end at the conclusion of a game, but the really satisfying payoffs come at the end of a story arc over multiple sessions. If you look back to last night's D&D game that we ran here on Saving Throw, I think that's a prime example of that things kept building and building and building, and we had some sessions that ended, with a satisfying milestone and victory, but ultimately what we got to were these very, for me anyhow, gripping and compelling payoffs that had been built up over the course of 10 sessions. So regardless of your feelings on a story or a plot or whatever, you're still trying to, in my humble opinion, you should be trying to mimic that kind of rising action, engagement, setbacks, conquering, climax, denouement. Those pieces of storytelling should be available to you, and you should try to apply them to your game. So I encourage you to think about not only okay, what is interesting about this encounter, but what function does it fulfill within the session? Okay. Create Cam says, if a GM is seeking to be surprised as well, shouldn't they be satisfied with creating situations that players can surprise the GM with, like a player deciding to initiate combat, etc.? I think that's all a GMing style thing, right? I'm not going to tell you you should be satisfied with letting the players surprise you. I think you should be open to the players surprising you. I think you should be open to looking for moments where you can surprise the players with something you hadn't thought of. Last night in the D&D game, one of the players did a move that was extremely surprising. They encountered this vampire-like creature that apparently had this, and they had this ring that apparently offered some sort of control over it. And one of the players said, I'm going to put that thing on. I had not planned for that at all. It was a great moment. Did it work out for the player? No. Did I entertain the possibility? Yes. Does it offer further possibility down the road? Yes. So I don't think you can strictly say oh, the players should offer all of the, intrigue and potential for surprise, or the DM is, in strict control. Role-playing games are back and forth, and I firmly believe that the more that you can embrace and enhance, listen and reflect, reincorporate, remix what your players are saying and doing and following, the better game that you will have. The more that you can interweave your ideas and the players' ideas, the more invested everyone is. If the DM is handing down storylines but not listening to what the players are responding to, then you've lost players. Similarly, if the GM is solely at, beholden to the whims of the players in terms of what they want to do, I don't think that that is a rewarding play experience for most GMs. It's not a position I really want to be in. I want to be a partner in creativity with my players. Sometimes that partnership is like equity in a company where I own 75% of the creativity and they own 25%. But like any good stock, it flows back and forth. I'm going to let them have 50 or 60%. If you go back to Ironkeep Chronicles, the players basically wrote up the whole village and then I ran with it. Okay, great. I gave them 60, 70% creativity in the creation of that town. And then the power flowed back to me, and I reincorporated and put my spin on it, made it engaging for me. And now we've got something that everybody has a stake in. All right. So let's get to the heart of the matter. We've talked on a very high level kind of theory type of way about this, right? I believe that this traditional presentation of random encounters is too flat and uninspired to really provide you with the meat and bone for an engaging, spontaneous, and dynamic random encounter. There's just not enough there, right? 3 hobgoblins show up. I can make that work, but not because of what's on the page. The flip side of a very strongly I would say this is a strongly scripted encounter, right? These are orcs, they have prisoners, we've got names for the prisoners, this guy's got his favorite walking stick. There's a lot of details here that it's almost basically a mini encounter that happens to it's in a scripted encounter that happens to have been included on a random encounter chart. I'm not bagging on that. I think for my personal playstyle, there's too much temptation to like start cherry picking those guys out of the book and going, I'm gonna run this, I'm gonna run this, I'm gonna run this, which is fine. It doesn't fulfill the role of random encounters. What is the solution then? We want to create specifics, but we want to create specifics in a dynamic way that doesn't necessarily that isn't so tightly scripted, right? All right, let's get down to the details. This is what I would recommend as a framework for you to create random encounters that do not suck. All right, now we have this divided into 4 columns. Obviously, whether you use a D12, whether you use a D4, a D6, or whatever, you can use a percentile chart, whatever you want to do, right? That's all fine. But let's just take a quick look at the 4 different encounters. So the very first counter is what I consider the heart of the random encounter. And I was going to put monster in there, but I feel like that is too prescriptive, right? I don't think that every random encounter has to be a pointless combat encounter, or even has to be a combat encounter that's meaningful or whatever, right? Blah, blah, blah. But I think there needs to be a magnet in every encounter. Something that the players are drawn to or is drawn to the players. It's a bit of high-tech, it's a term of art, right? Like it's terminology that I'm still working on, but I like the idea that, okay, what's the magnet for this encounter? You could also call it a hook, but to me, like, a hook is a little more specific, right? The magnet is sort of just the central creature involved in the thing. It doesn't have to be a creature. That's the other reason I called it a magnet. Let's run down the list. A pilgrim, 1d3 Minotaur warriors, a halfling cobbler and his son, 2d12 goblin refugees, 2 elven druids, a mage and her apprentice, etc., right? So this is really just a list of creatures. Now you could tailor this to whatever specific kind of locale plot goings on, whatever you want to do, right? Obviously, this column is open-ended for you, and I've just created this generic kind of column. Second column, quirk. So we've added a little bit of detail in our magnet column, right? A forlorn kobold. Okay, well that informs me a little bit of how I'm going to roleplay that guy. A forlorn kobold, like Meepo last night. Oh, he's sad about something, right? A knight and retainer. Well, I know there's a relationship between those two creatures. This was supposed to be two clumsy alchemists. A clumsy alchemist. Well, that instantly inspires me. I don't need a lot. A clumsy alchemist. That's going to go some obvious places right there, right? Goblin refugees has a certain spin on it. A pilgrim implies that there's a quest. Maybe the most boring thing on this list is 1d3 direwolves and 2 elven druids. What do they do? Okay, well that brings us to the next column, which is quirk. So that gives us something extra, an extra set of specifics to tag on to what our initial magnet is for this encounter. Now, again, you could tailor this list maybe more specifically around your campaign, around the adventure that you're running, around the locale, whatever it is. You could also tailor this list more specifically to the groups of creatures that are in the magnet, right? So if you're going to have a bunch of unintelligent creatures like wolves, owl bears, deer, etc., if you're going to build your encounter around, oh, we're journeying through the woods and we're not going to, and it's been specified or indicated that we're not going to have any civilized contact, well then most of my list is going to be wild animals. Then I might make quirks that are more tailored to my wild animals. Let's take a look at these, right? Wearing leg irons, plagued by a cough, taking copious notes, bearing fresh, jagged scars, with a ghostly hand. Okay, well, 3 dwarven sisters with a ghostly hand, now that is a compelling scene. It's engaging. Oh, what's going on? Does one of them have a ghostly hand? Do they have one of those magic items from old 3E where it was a hand of the Magi that allowed you to cast cast Unseen Servant at will, or Mage Hand at will? What does that mean? But instantly you have 2 pieces of specific information that inspire this random encounter. Okay, well now this doesn't feel like a dire rat. It doesn't feel like 3 kobolds who show up. Instead, it's 3 kobolds carrying a worn Bible. Well, wait a minute. Did they steal it? Are they taking it someplace? Do they covet it? Those are the things that are prompted by that simple, specific piece of detail. But I don't have to fill in all of those blanks. I've got enough information to now go, okay, well, why is that? Okay. If you want to adjust this to a percentile table, that's fine. Really what it came down to was I came up with 12 different play purposes, and so I decided to break this down into just a table of 12 items. You can fix this, adjust this any way that you want. The columns are the main thing. Let's finish off the columns. The columns and the play purpose are really what matter. Magnet quirk seeking. What's seeking? So Mike Merles tweeted out a link to a blog post that talked about motivation. And that helps, okay? That paints a third dimension to our encounter. So 3 kobolds are carrying a worn Bible. Okay, why? Well, the seeking column helps you decide what that is. If you go look at the motivation table, their motivation, like they're seeking something that's lost. Well, maybe they're looking for, it's a locked Bible and they're looking for the key that opens it or whatever. I prefer the term seeking because it's more active than motivation. They're seeking something, even if they're just seeking peace or rest, right? 3 kobolds carrying a worn Bible who are seeking a lost son. Well, now all of a sudden, a lost son takes on a whole new connotation, right? Like when I wrote that in there, it was like, oh, a parent is seeking a child. But now it feels like, oh, a lost son, one of the priesthood. They're seeking someone. Okay, great. Well, I paired that with a random name generator, and all of a sudden I've got this encounter, right? So seeking gives our magnet some direction. It gives them an angle that they're it gives them a goal, motivation, whatever you want to call it. But it gives them impetus rather than you come across a knight and retainer partaking of wine. Well, okay, they're getting drunk. Why? An easy way to figure out why is to go escape. Oh, what are they escaping from? They just escaped from an ogre's lair. Oh, and they're celebrating. Oh, great. Okay, now I have the scene. Oh, I can tell the players about the ogre's lair and the horrible tribulations, how they barely escaped from by the skin of their teeth, and they got away with some wine, blah blah blah, etc., etc., etc. Right? So it just rather than your magnet and your rather than your creatures being these static type of things that like, oh, okay, well, what happens next? You put a little spin on them. You give them a direction. You give them a little depth, or you give them an experience that they are either seeking or that they have just lived that they can share with the players. The last column is really our metagame column, right? So what is the purpose of this encounter? Now, this is not something where you like add up the four things into a sentence, right? If you look at this random encounter chart, the first three are sort of like the Numenera construct or the cipher system construct of I'm a blanking blank who blanks, right? I am a mage and her apprentice partaking of wine who is seeking a lost son. Right? So I'm an adjective noun who is whatever. Adverb. This last column, play purpose, helps inform why are we having this encounter. Now, I would encourage you, of all of the columns on this thing, this is the one where you should either pick or re-roll if you don't like what comes up. But these are different functions within the arc of your session that this encounter might fulfill. Change of pace or tone. Drain their resources. Foreshadow a coming encounter. Introduce aid. Introduce a complication. Paint the world. Evoke wonder. Offer a side trek. Resolve a mystery. Condense or streamline the plot. Offer a tough choice. Reveal a weakness. Show the world is a hostile place. That last one, I will caution you, is the default mode for most random encounters. Be careful of like going, oh, well, this is going to show everybody how tough the world is. A fight that is pointless just eats time. And the idea that, oh, well, this shows that the world's a hostile place. That's the premise of the game. You have taken up your sword because we are surrounded on all sides by monsters and evil men who wish to do us ill. Please save us. Be the hero this world needs. You don't need to reinforce that with a random encounter. It should be obvious. So be careful with that one. What this does, it helps to, the first three inform the players of what the direction of the encounter is. There's a knight and his retainer who are getting drunk because they escaped an ogre. They're seeking escape. They escaped because they escaped. Okay. Well, if I want to foreshadow a coming encounter, now I know, oh, what did they escape from? What are they celebrating? There's a terrible ogre who insists on issuing a vicious, greedy toll on anyone who crosses the road. And unless you can defeat him, you will be his prisoner. He is lazy. He is self-confident. He likes to celebrate with his ill-gotten goods far too much for his own good. He's not very cunning, but he is strong and brutish and vicious. And he will have no compunction about cutting you to pieces if you get in his way and resist him. Okay, well, now I, as the DM, I know where this is going. Like, I know why we're having this thing. I know what kind of information I need to impart by the end of this encounter. Why are we having this encounter? This column answers that question. None of the other three do. The other three can be an interesting side note, but without this fourth column, without knowing the purpose of play, where this encounter functions in your story, within your session, without knowing that, it can be trivial. It can be pointless. Players can wonder, why is this happening? My goal with this column is to help you get to the purpose, help you convey the meaning, why this is happening. Help your players feel like at the end of this, they have reached some new realization, whatever that is. It could be something horrible. Oh, we're in over our heads, guys. I thought this trip through the Havenwood was going to be a lot easier than it's turning out. This is awful. It could be something great. We made an ally with the Moon Druids. They're going to help provide us, our friends, safe passage through the woods when they come through here next week or whatever. But out of all of these things, so we've all seen, quote-unquote flavor tables that allow you to develop an NPC on the fly, and this is what his occupation, roll for his occupation, and roll for a quirk that he might have, and roll for how many family members he has, and roll for the name of his grandfather, or whatever it is, right? So the magnet quirk-seeking motivation type of stuff is not in any way groundbreaking. I'll be the first to admit that, right? You can go on DriveThruRPG and find a huge book of these things. You can download it right now. It's far better than what I just whipped up here literally in 10 minutes before the stream started. But as far as I know, none of those books are going to give you advice on, okay, with this encounter, here's the purpose of play. Here's how this is going to fit into your session. This will help provide a roadmap for you and your players in terms of the puzzle pieces, where they're going. So, that is my methodology, or my take, anyhow, on random encounters and how to build random encounters that are dynamic and engaging, and yet serve the purpose of fulfilling a function within the greater whole of the session with the players and of your story that you're building together overall. I hope that it's illuminating. I feel like this is very useful, and I wish somebody would have sat down with me and explained, like, oh, okay, here's why your random encounters are, well, it's not fun. You're not having fun with them. Either that, or what you do is you end up kludging these things and coming to these sorts of realizations. If you are a Patreon backer, this sheet, along with a blank one that just has purpose of play filled in, is available in the Iron King Chronicles Patreon subfolder, or in the Iron King Chronicles subfolder of the Patreon folder. So this is here for you to use and digest and enjoy. Not all, it doesn't have all of my notes from the talk today on it, but I want you to, it's available to you if you want it, if you're a Patreon backer. The other thing, thanks, John. I'm glad that you are getting something out of it. That's always nice. I do want to give a shout out here. This is not directly related, but I want to give a big shout out to Dungeon World. Okay? I've mentioned this book before, and I've mentioned it as a great source for GM advice. And specifically, if you go to page 165, 164, 165, this is the section on GM moves. And it has a wonderful array of meta options for you to deploy in your Dungeon World game. But I think it also provides a roadmap for when you're DMing, like, oh, what can I do to make things more complicated, more interesting? What can I do to, we talk so readily about raising the stakes on things, but it doesn't mean that much until you kind of pair it with specifics like offer an opportunity with or without cost. Turn their move back on them. It's really only 3 or 4 pages. But it helps you decide, or it helps illuminate, like, oh, okay, these are moves that I can make within my D&D game that create higher stakes, create more intense, combustible situations for role-playing. So that's just a side note. That is I always like to when I was putting this together, I was like, boy, this language that's in here, it really reminds me of something. And I'm like, it reminds me of Dungeon World. And when I first read Dungeon World, I was like, this is a very scholarly text. It has a very deliberately stilted approach to laying out the game and how it should be approached and how it should be played, right? So that was, I will admit, that was difficult for me. That was like, okay, well, it's not D&D. Well, that's the point, partially, right? But also, you're looking at these things from sort of a meta point of view, and it's also driving a point of view of let's push our players and push ourselves to tell stories that build and heighten and come to a climax. And the only way you do that is by continually putting the screws to the players and occasionally letting them off so that they can take a breath and prepare to climb that next step up the quest mountain. So regardless of what you may have gotten out of this particular talk today, I do think, I just want to give props to Dungeon World for helping illuminate my GM career and the way that I think about the game. And I will tell you, one of the I don't know, I guess it was probably 4 years ago, I went to Gen Con and I was sitting at the bar with Lindsay, who would eventually end up being my wife, but she introduced me to Adam Coble, and we had this long argument. I was like, D&D is great. And he's like, well, it's not always great. And I was like, I think it's great. And he's like, well. And, I had not read Dungeon World at that point, and I knew that he was the author of it, but I had not read Dungeon World at that point. I was like, I'm not sure. I came around. So let me just close this thing off with maybe my best piece of advice, which is, and I could probably do a better impression of Adam, but that's not fair. I'm sure he could do. I remember, he was like, who is this guy? I believe I was there in all of my Dungeon Bastard finery, and we did have to kind of, come to an understanding where he was like, I was really argumentative, and I'm like, I was really argumentative too. So I love Adam. He is a terrific voice in the community, and I really admire him and everything that he does. And I am very, very appreciative that I have benefited from his work and his philosophy and his outlook. Can't say enough great things about him. So that brings me to kind of my closing parenthetical comment here, which is I have been wrong. I am going to change my mind about many things. And I do have this deep well of experience, having played D&D since the old AD&D age, and having spent so many summers mastering that system and really developing a love for this game, but now getting introduced and learning new games and finding new ways to play, that this is my experience and this is my insight. And I'm sharing it with you because I want you to have the opportunity to learn and grow from the things that I have experienced. But 100%, your mileage may vary. You may try these things and they may not work for you. I may not use them all the time either. I may cheat or fudge or fall back on old habits. I will make mistakes. All I want you to do is to have a great game and be a friendly and open-minded advocate for those around you. That's my goal with this presentation, with this character of the Dungeon Bastard, with my tweets, with the role that I am trying to establish within the community is to be an advocate for everyone to have fun and to find whatever fun in whatever way that they can without stepping on the backs of anyone else. So, hopefully this has been a productive and illuminating chat for you. If not, you can catch me on Twitter if you have questions or you're not clear on something or you have a different perspective. I appreciate everyone who has, and absolutely, like, I have not met Sage Latora, so I don't want to, like, dismiss Sage Latora's efforts either. And, we could go down a long list of people who are innovating in the space, and I consider John Harper to be one of them. I'm a huge fan, as I said earlier. So we could make a big list of people who are doing innovative and interesting, and also, I would say, inclusive work in the RPG community. And fortunately, the people who are not doing that ends up being a very short list. And I have my disagreements with them, but I don't feel the need to call attention to them any more than they call attention to themselves. So, your mileage may vary, but if you want to continue this discussion, please hit me up on Twitter or subscribe to our Twitch channel, subscribe to our YouTube channel, become a Patreon backer of Saving Throw Show. The only reason that I can do this, that I have this forum for you, is because people like yourselves, viewers who love gaming, who love the idea of having inclusive, fun, actual play online, face-to-face, support us with their bits, with their follows, with their shares, with their hard-earned cash, and sometimes it's just a matter of sharing it, donating their time. But whatever it is, however you can contribute, please do. So, thank you so much. We're not going to get to the recap today. I think we'll have a miniature recap maybe on Tuesday with our prep session on Tuesday. So, I'm not sure. Let's take a brief check-in on what's on board for the rest of the week. So tonight is dark. We're not doing anything exciting, and actually this is that old calendar, so I need to kind of make a little scrubby. The main thing that you need to know about for the rest of the week, tomorrow night, is Call of Cthulhu Black Bag with Mr. Wes Otis. It is our medieval Call of Cthulhu campaign, which is pretty interesting. So you can check that out tomorrow night at 8 o'clock. You have the weekend to enjoy and review all of our wonderful shows. We had an amazing session last night on Saving Throw with the Ironkeep Chronicles. Like I said, it was very role-playing heavy. I myself felt very emotional about the things that were going on. And I know that there wasn't a lot of combat, but I did feel like it brought a wonderful sense of closure to that whole adventure arc, and it also balanced out the previous session, which was so like nothing but combat. So it was a nice return, a nice reset to, okay, well, let's deal with the consequences of what have happened here. What was your mission, and what did you find out, and how is that going to play out when you dump the dirt on the mayor and tax parents and all that sort of stuff. So, yeah, it was a fun session. If you didn't get a chance to watch it, go back in the VOD and check it. I'm going to. Because I thought it was super great. So I will be back next Tuesday at noon. Right now is what it's scheduled for, with Disorganized Play. We're going to talk about the one-shot. We're running a one-shot next week set in Neverwinter. Avril and Thawne are going off on a small adventure. I think we will see what's involved there. I have to kind of mill around some ideas for what this one-shot could be. Again, I want this to be a fun, somewhat frivolous, but then set us up for going forward. We're going to start playing the White Plume Mountain adventure that's also in Tales of the Yawning Portal. And based on the way that has played out, or at least this first adventure has played out, I expect that will then take us likely to the release of Tomb of Annihilation, and we'll probably move on to Tomb of Annihilation after that. We shall see. So, yes, Black Razor. Black Razor, that's going to be one of the hooks, is they need to unearth Black Razor, right? I don't know if they need to, but let's hope they do. There's a lot of power in that module. It's so fun, so old school. And it will be interesting. I think it provides an interesting challenge because my players I think they'll enjoy the riddles and the puzzles, but there's not enough role-playing in there. So I think we need to have an intersection of, like, somehow the Lords of the Iron Keep need to bring some of their influence or put their pizzazz on White Plume Mountain so that there's more RP involved and there's something for them to tackle besides, like, okay, well, now let's kill these scorpions or whatever it is. All right. Great chat today. Thank you so much for everyone who tuned in, who shared on the tweeters, etc., etc., etc. Thanks to everyone who modded. I don't know that Fockwad, are you with us today? I didn't see your handle pop up in the chat, but I appreciate all of your comments. You really, it was a very fruitful discussion today. I hope you got something out of it. I certainly did. Until next time, let's dungeon. I'm not even going to click on the calendar. It's just, here's the title screen. Thank you, everyone, for joining me.